All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. If you've hit play on this video, you're about to experience a very lengthy and informative and hopefully entertaining conversation. I'm joined by someone I've known for a very, very long time who's got his hands in a lot of different cool pies. So I think this is going to be a great one. So it's my pleasure to welcome the man, Mr. Drew Stone. How you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me, and welcome to anybody and everybody that's tuning in.
Right on, right on. I got to tell you, first and foremost, doing this video with you is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you've got a lot of things going on as always. You've got a great history, and I've known you for a long time. So
Mhm.
this is going to be a nice deep dive. It's a curse because we can't do a 10-hour interview. So we're going to have to find a balance somewhere
Right.
in here.
Well,
Uh,
it's interesting for me because I'm not hosting it, which is
right, right.
it's always weird when I go on somebody's show because I'm so used to last couple of years hosting, hosting a show. When I go on somebody else's show, it feels odd, It's like I feel like I want to interview you back, So
Yeah, totally. And for
uh,
those who don't know, who are new to what Drew's referring to, Drew hosts a show called the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. It airs every Wednesday and Sunday, 3 to 5 Eastern, on YouTube, as well as on Facebook. And we'll get into the links a bit later. And when this video posts, I'll include them all so people can go check it out. But Drew's been doing that for about 3.5 years now. Uh,
yeah, it started during the pandemic. Yep.
Absolutely. And Drew's done a bunch of very interesting music documentaries. He's a musician as well. He's fronted a number of different bands over the years. So, like I said, we've got a lot to dive into. But obviously, starting where we must start, which is the very beginning. You're a Forest Hills guy, right?
I was born in Forest Hills. I was born in Queens, in Forest Hills, Queens, in Booth Memorial Hospital. Um, and my dad grew up in an orphanage in the Lower East Side. Um, my mom grew up in Brooklyn, but my dad grew up in an orphanage, and there's an incredible story behind that. But he ended up, um, he was a tough guy. He was in in a Jewish street gang in the Bronx called the Stallions, and he was running into some trouble, and he ended up in the army, and it really straightened him out by his own admission, and he ended up getting into. He was a boxer. He boxed, and interestingly enough, he got into the film business,
Mm.
and starting as a messenger, as like because in the boxing matches back then, after every round, they would download the film and give the reel to the messenger who would run it to the film lab. So that was my dad's first kind of job peripherally in the film business. And incredibly, he ended up like working his way up in the film business to becoming a really renowned director, specializing in commercials. He did a couple films. He did a documentary on Muhammad Ali in the 70s. It was involved in a couple features, but he was basically made his mark doing humor dialogue commercials. And so, yeah, I was born in Forest Hills, Queens, and we moved around, and my parents split when I was 9. So I did some growing up in Queens, in Manhattan, um, in the Bronx. Yeah. So I grew up in Queens, Manhattan, in the Bronx. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Now, obviously, your career has been based around filmmaking and music. Which passion grabbed you first, or did they kind of come at the same time for you?
No, sadly, growing up, in a lot of ways, I took what my dad was doing for granted. It was like something my dad was doing. It didn't. I didn't really grasp it, but then again, I wanted to be an actor, and I did some acting and modeling at a young age. And I did like plays in summer camp, and I did some modeling, and I ended up going to Emerson College in Boston to study acting. So I guess, you know, when forced with like, what do you want to do with your life? It was sort of like, I want to be an actor, you know, because that looked easy. And I was, you know, immature and lazy. And I thought that would just be an easy path where I could just be myself and be cool like Jack Nicholson and James Dean and you know, be a star, you know. So initially, I had a bit of a fantasy about acting. That's what I gravitated to as a teenager, like going into college. You know, it wasn't really it wasn't beyond that. It wasn't film production or cinematography like my brother, or I wasn't interested in photography. You know what I mean? It was, as a teenager, I was interested in sort of hanging out with my peers, you know, music and doing drugs. I mean, that's the culture I grew up in
Right.
back then, right? So we're talking late 70s, early 80s. The culture that I grew up in here in New York City, going to public school and all that, in my world was really centered around fucking drugs and alcohol, drugs, hanging out. You know, this was, you know, New York City was a wild and exciting place. And, you know, and I loved music. I became infatuated with music. You know, it just really spoke to me, and certain bands and certain music just really spoke to me. And I just became infatuated. I was infatuated with music.
And certainly that carried on when you went to Emerson, because it wasn't long before you met up with many of the people who were deep into what was the early Boston hardcore scene up there, right?
Yeah. What happened was I went up to Emerson in the summer of 1981. Summer of 81, I went up to Emerson, and I had a place. I was in the Charles Gate dormitory, and across the street was the Fens Gate dormitory, which we know now the dead Kennedys played. So in the Fens Gate dormitory on the first floor was the cafeteria. The dead Kennedys played that cafeteria like I think a couple months before I got there, incredibly enough, and I have pictures of it. I was in the cafeteria, and I met a couple other people early on. Now, you know, keep in mind, you know, coming up from New York, you know, punk and hardcore. Well, hardcore didn't exist at this point, right? In 1981, hardcore was not a term that was you know, universally used like it is now. So hardcore didn't exist. It was it was basically punk. So I had no, for me, like, I didn't come from a punk background. Like when I grew up in when I was a teenager in New York City, we went and saw a couple punk things, but it was really it was like a joke to us, you know. It was just like Sid Vicious, you know, like get crazy, get rowdy, you know. It was like I didn't I certainly didn't grasp any sort of, you know, conceptual continuity when it came to your punk music. Like we used to sneak into here in New York at the time. We would sneak into a lot of bars and clubs. I mean, because the drinking age was 18 here, and there's places that will let us drink at 15 years old. I mean, I was going into bars and drinking at 15, you know, and sneaking into clubs. I mean, we all looked older, right? And back then, nobody was fucking busting your balls, right? Oh, and we go to 42nd, you get a fake ID. So we had some sort of, hey, you got an ID? Yeah, here. All right, come in. You know, so we one thing I vividly remember, we got into a club called Haraz, and there was an opening band, and then the main band was on, and it was like two guys on stage, just two guys, one of them in front of a keyboard, one of them standing in front of a keyboard, you know, with like wraparound shades, and the other one just sort of like going, oh, you know, like twisting and fruging, you
Yep.
know?
I know
And
who this is.
we thought it was the funniest thing. We were like, like, oh, look at this fucking, like, it was like, what the fuck is this? And it always stuck with me. Because we always referenced it. It was hilarious. We thought it was hilarious. Of course, it turns out it was Suicide,
Right.
right?
Right.
And the band that opened up for Suicide was the Misfits. This is 1978 at Hurrah. So, there was a couple of sort of, times where, things crossed. I remember, we used to go down into the village on the weekends and like, get into like parties. And I mean, we were wild. I was a wild teenager. We would come down and there was a pack of us and we would go to, Union Square and get 2-and-alls and 2nd-alls and wash them down with Jack Daniels and smoke reefer. And like, you go to parties in the village and we'd get into fights and it was violent and crazy. And, that's just what you did in that era growing up in New York City, which, and I'm sure it's not unique, right? People did that all over. So yeah, so showing up in Boston, in the cafeteria, I see a guy with his head shaved, right? And I was like really intrigued by this. Like, what is this? You know what I mean? Because, I was a teenager, right? Teenagers didn't shave their heads back then. It just didn't happen. The only people who shaved their heads back then were like Marines and psychopaths. It wasn't anywhere near as accepted in the sort of universal lexicon that it is now.
There are still a couple of those around, though, to be clear.
Yeah, right. So someone introduces me to this guy, and I'll never forget the conversation. I'm like, what are you into? Like, and he's like, I'm into hardcore, and I'm like, hardcore or hardcore, like what? Like what do you mean? Like Blondie, the B-52s. This is what I actually said. Blondie, the B-52s, Joan Jett. Like that was my reference point. I was like, and he said, no, like, you ever hear of Black Flag? And I said, like the bug spray Black Flag? He said, yeah. So we were talking, and he ended up saying, hey, look, instead of explaining this thing to you, why don't you just come with me this weekend and we'll go see a show. There's like a thing going on not far from here. So that weekend it came up, and we went, not far from where we lived, because I was in Charles Gate Dorm. He was across the street in Fens Gate Dorm. And we went to someplace on Boylston Street, right near, tragically, very close to where the Boston Marathon bomb went off, actually, right there on Boylston, that stretch on Boylston Street there. And it was an old kind of factory building. And we went to a place called Media Workshop, which was like it was a like an art space. It was all exposed sheetrock, and I wouldn't even call it a stage. The bands played on the floor, basically. There was like 20 kids there, maybe 25 kids there tops, and there was bands playing. And the band that I saw that playing was a band called SSD Control, and SSD Control played, and kids started. This was in the early days of thrashing, right? It wasn't called slam dancing back then. It was called, we're gonna thrash. We called it thrashing, because, right? So kids were thrashing, and it just seemed really fun and inclusive. So I jumped right in. I got into it, and it was like 20 kids just bouncing around, smashing into each other for the music. So the band finishes, and the guitar player, Al Baril from SSD, takes off his guitar and approaches me, not in a threatening manner. It was more like, hey, who are you? Like, because it was very rare that a new face would show up. The scene was very insular, very embryonic, very, very, very early on in the game here. And he was just wanted to know, like, hey, who are you? How'd you get here? And so I connected with him, and I connected with them, and I connected with the scene, and I fell in with the Boston crew. I was part of the original Boston crew. I'm thanked on the first SSD Control record. The Kids Will Have Their Say on Boston crew, which just was being released right now by Trust Records, and so I fell in with that crowd. I was one of the whatever it was, 10 of us, and by the way, the person that I met in the cafeteria that brought me to my first hardcore show was Jack Choke Kelly, who sings for Slapshot and formerly of Negative Effects. They're doing a reunion pretty soon as well. But he was going to Emerson. He was I think he was a year above me, right? So he was already there for a year by the time I showed up. And that's what set it on its course. I just I fell in with those guys and just became really inspired and excited, and ended up getting into a band, and ended up just really, really becoming part of it. It was a very inspiring youth movement.
Now, at that time, obviously, the sort of cornerstone of Boston hardcore was that straight edge element. And you had mentioned when you were growing up in New York, things got a bit wild. How did being a part of that scene in Boston affect your outlook as far as how you took care of yourself, what constituted partying in Boston versus what it was in New York, things along those lines?
It was tough. It was tough because of the background I came up in. And also, excuse me, I was a freshman living in a college dorm. I was a freshman living in a college dorm. It was like Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like a fuck fest, and everybody's partying, and I look back and I know this behavior. I mean, but back then I see pictures that I have of us in our dorms, and there's beer everywhere. I mean, this is in the dorm. Nowadays, I'm told, you're underage and you bring alcohol into your dorm, they'll throw you out of college. I mean, I think the drinking age in Boston was I think we were drinking age in Boston. I think it was 18 there as well. And so it was tough because everybody was partying and smoking pot and doing bong hits and drinking beer and having a good time. And it was tough for me. I think part of the misconception about the Boston scene, early Boston scene, at least when I was around, was like everybody was straight edge. And that certainly wasn't the case. But the case was that pretty much the loudest voice, Al Baril, in the most prominent band, SSD Control, espoused the straight edge rhetoric.
Right.
And which was basically, based on Minor Threat. Al took a lot of cues from Ian and in Minor Threat and DC. And so not everybody was, straight edge. And, honestly, I kind of gave it a shot. But it didn't stick. I enjoyed smoking grass at the time, and I enjoyed partying. Also what I didn't mention too was before I even went to college, I rode the rails with the Grateful Dead. As a young teenager, I went out and like toured the country with following the Grateful Dead. And this was the music that I initially at 15, 16, 17 years old, was into. Grateful Dead, Allman Brothers Band, Frank Zappa, Jefferson Airplane, that kind of stuff was and Southern rock was big where I was too. But I kind of rode the rails with the Grateful Dead. We knew some people that were manufacturing LSD. They would front us LSD, and we would go from show to show selling LSD.
Mm.
You know, when I could, and it was a great, thrilling, exciting adventure. And of course, it was only years later, and maybe we'll get is that, you know, years later, did I sort of come to the conclusion, well, maybe it wasn't years later actually, that the Grateful Dead community and culture and the American hardcore community and culture are pretty much the same thing. Don't be fucking fooled by the dressings, you know, by the ketchup and the mustard that's on the hot dog. You
Right.
know, it's all community and culture, and both were a youth movement, and it was only later that I sort of went down the road that I started to be able to, you know, put this stuff into, you know, compartmentalize it and think, oh, I get it, I understand now. So because, you know, so at the time too, I never turned my back on my Grateful Dead friends and my people from that world. So like when I shaved my head, when I was part of the Boston thing, I'd still go out with some of my friends and go see some Dead shows and do this and do that. And it was really interesting, you know, because there was nobody else like me at those Dead shows. I mean, one or two friends were sort of sympathetic, but everyone else was like, what the fuck are you doing? And this was a big tipping point for me, was when I went to the Dead and I saw some friends, and one of them was like, that's fucked up. What happened to the Drew Stone that we used to know and love? Like, what happened? You know, like, what happened? And then I went back to my hardcore friends, and one of my hardcore friends says, that's fucked up. What happened to the Drew Stone? We you know, so something clicked there, and I realized, you know what? I'm going to do for me what feels right and what I love. Because if I'm going to try to please people or try to, you know, live my life like that, that's nonsense. You know, it's just, so I'm just going to go with my heart, and I'm going to do what I love. And at the time, it was very lonely. It was really lonely, because there wasn't like, hey, there was a bunch of us that went to Dead shows that loved Black Flag. You know, I was like ridiculed by this side, kind of ridiculed by that side, but I did what I did, and you know, and I loved it. So, and now, interestingly enough, all these years later, you know, in a lot of ways, it's an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I've been to some post Jerry Dead shows, let's call them.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there are meetups up here in New Hampshire as well for dead people. And I've gone to, you know, I've checked it out. And I'll tell you, man, some of the best times have been like in the parking lot, meeting the people, selling their wares. You know, they hitchhiked down to the show, and now they're selling prints of paintings they've done of Jerry to pay for their way home. That's hardcore to me. That's punk rock to me.
Absolutely. It's community and culture, and it's a DIY ethos that you know, all these hardcore kids started espousing, you know, early on. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. They can't stand each other, and yet they're doing the exact same thing outside the mainstream. This is ironic, you know? And so, you know, now we have the, you know, through the shifting sands of time, we could look at this in perspective, and sort of, you and I, as musical archaeologists and musical historians, and, you know, we could sort of put it in its proper place, and you know, but yeah, it was really interesting. But back to the Boston hardcore thing, everybody wasn't straight edge, and there was some, you know, there was some hard partying people in that early Boston hardcore scene, you know, and I knew a bunch of them. And but not to take anything away from what Al Burrill and Jamie Sharappa and, you know, Dave Smalley, a lot of the hardcore, that they're hardcore, and Choke, you know, what they were doing. I mean, you know, there was a minute there with, the Boston, we were the Boston hardcore kids were hardcore. We go to other cities and get into it, and we danced hard, and really we kind of took it to the Boston at that 81 in 81. Boston kind of took it to the next level, as far as like, hard dancing goes, and sort of that, and that rhetoric. But nobody fucked with me. I never had like, anyone of that straight edge crew like get in my face about it. But then again, I wouldn't be sitting there at a show, flaunting, so, and I didn't have anything to flaunt. It's not like, but I wouldn't be openly drinking at shows. I mean, there was no need for that, but I wasn't like, I'm fucking straight edge, like.
The way it seemed to me, I missed the boat because I was born in 77. But I'm seeing a lot of these guys now living up here, like Al and Nancy and the SSD people. And Nancy just did this amazing event a few weeks back for the SSD book at a hotel in Boston. So a lot of these people are still around. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like their attitude is everybody is an individual, has their own voice, can do their thing, but this is what we feel we have to say. And if you want to say something else, cool. But this is what we're saying. This is our voice, and this is what we're trying to spread as far as a message. But nobody's like, oh, you don't believe exactly the way I do. Fuck you. I was on your show as a guest a couple of years ago on the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live, and I'm chain smoking the whole time. Al Bareil's in the comment section. I run into Al shortly thereafter. He's like, hey, Joel, good to meet you. I loved you on the podcast. So, this whole like dividing line nonsense is exactly that. It's nonsense. And we're all adults here. So we can
you know what I gotta throw in? I gotta throw a card I gotta throw on the table here. Who I was friends with, who were a big influence on all of us back then, Bad Brains.
Right.
And like, I liked smoking grass back then, and I smoked a lot of grass with like HR and those guys, and they stayed with me, and like everybody respected the Bad Brains.
What are you gonna do? Kick the Bad Brains out of your scene because they're Rasta? Get the fuck out of here.
It's like, I'm hanging out with the Bad Brains and I'm smoking spliffs. Like that was more appealing to me in 1981 than sort of like, you keep in mind also, like I remember when the Minor Threat single came out, that had straight edge on it. It was just another song on the single. It wasn't some call to arms or certainly not what it's, anywhere near what it's become now, where it's just sort of like this anthem. It was just, hey, that's funny. That's interesting. That's cool. All right. We're minors. They mark our hands, and we kind of spun it into, this is my thing.
The reality is, if you're not inclusive of varying ideas and perspectives, you don't have a scene.
Yeah.
That's what you need to have a scene. You need to have straight edge people and Rastas and straights and gays and blacks and whatever, because that's what actually creates your fucking scene. Not a bunch of jerk offs with the same opinion who talk in circles every day.
I think absolutely. And I think that initially a lot of these scenes start out that way, certainly with good intentions. And these were the halcyon days, it was 1981 Boston, or the summer of love in San Francisco, which was all great until, until speed came in, and then the dealers, and then Charles, I think initially a lot of these scenes are very, I don't want to say naive, but initially they're very inclusive, and early on, girls were a part of it big time, and everybody was welcome, everybody. And then things sort of evolve, and the dancing gets really violent, and the girls get pushed to the side, and drugs fraction people out, and but initially I think a lot of these scenes are very it's sort of the the glory days of it. The early part of it is always, really fantastic. And at the time in Boston, I must say, I felt that I was part of something special.
Mm. And clearly you were, because in 2023, most of those people are still around. And like I said, there's there's the SSD book, there's the reissue coming out. A lot of these people are still kind of omnipresent in the scene all these years later. So there was obviously validity to it. It wasn't a passing thing, because now you have people who are middle age, who are still the same buddies with people they were 40 years ago, and they still hang and they still meet up. And there are great people out there like Mark McKay, and Steve Rustine have a band called The Long Wait. They're still with Jamie as well, so they're still out there doing it. So that's what I love about being up here, is being connected with those people, because they never let it go. Obviously it was legitimate, and obviously it meant something, because you're still doing it.
I also think that, and this is not unique, and we've talked about this on my show many times, that art is cyclical in nature, and the wave goes in and the wave goes out. So some of them weren't, some of them were peripherally around for 10 years, but the wave went out, the wave comes back in, and I've seen that a lot. I wasn't in it the way I'm in it now my whole life. There were times where I was over here doing this or doing extreme sports films or whatever. And, so, but it's interesting because, art is cyclical, and hardcore's in, and then it fades out, and then someone comes to the party, and then there's a turnstile band, and oh shit. And so I've seen a lot of evolution and, different waves of it, so to speak. And it's interesting to have been there in the beginning, and to sort of see, like, oh, we're a hardcore band. It's like, really? That's what kids are calling hardcore these days? Like, but that's just how it is, right? Like, you're a hardcore band. That's hardcore. All right.
Well, let's bring the discussion down to New York. I know we're going to have to bounce around a little bit here.
Sure.
So you end up back in New York. You start a band called The High and the Mighty, and you're playing decent shows. Like, you're playing with the Glenn Danzig fronted Misfits. I think you play with TSOL, or is that the previous band? Yeah, play with those guys. So you're in New York. So this would have been what, 83?
I went back to New York summer of 83.
Okay. So
I cracked. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so by 83, I mean, a lot's going on with what is, still referred to as New York hardcore. A lot of the staple bands were kind of forming-ish. I know Cro-Mags came a little later, but you had a lot of I think Murphy's Law was around by then, of course, and AF, and Bad Brains were in and out, but they were kind of around. So coming from Boston and that whole thing, what was your impression of what New York was doing at that time when you returned and started doing things down there?
Well, it wasn't like a sudden, like, this is ending and I'm going to New York. It all along the way, from the very beginning, like I said, we would get in the vans and go play, go to New York, we'd go to DC. Al Baril had a van and I had a van. So between the two vans, you put 10 guys in each van, we would fucking show up in DC with, 20 guys. We'd show up at the A7 with 20 guys. So all along the way, SSD's playing fucking A7 this, 82, those Bad Brains retirement shows at CB's. We the infamous Staten Island Paramount Dead Kennedys riot show. I was down there in my van with a bunch of guys, and so was that, and so was Al. So all along the way, we come down to New York. So we met Vinny Stigma, Jimmy G, Roger Moret, Frenchie, Billy Psycho, like all these, Harley, and so on and so forth. So, like, Rabies, Doug Holland, these guys, like like the A7 back in the day, right? Doug Holland was a bartender. Jimmy G was a DJ. Ray B's was doing security. You know, so these are the guys so that was New York. We knew that already. So when I moved down there, it wasn't a abrupt, jarring transition.
Mhm.
It was like I knew there was a lot going on down there. One big thing I did was soon after I went to my first hardcore show and saw SSD Control. When I came back to New York for like Christmas vacation or whatever, I saw Black Flag was in the Village Voice. I saw Black Flag was playing the Mud Club, and I like braved it by myself. I like went into the void, into the unknown by myself, you know, down to you know, where the Mud Club was. And you know, back then bands would go on at 2, 3 in the morning. I remember waiting for hours for Black Flag to fucking play. But I saw Black Flag in '81, right when Rollins joined the band, and that was big for me. Like to see the mighty Black Flag with that lineup, with Henry, you know, with the shaved head, and Dez on second guitar, like that was a big one for me. That was very like I was big Black Flag. Like Damaged was a really big record for me. I mean, I think in retrospect, it's lost some of its luster because the band changed. But when Black Flag Damage came out, they fucking ruled the roost, man. That was the best fucking hardcore record, bar none, at least in our world at the time. And then the Bad Brains cassette came after that, and we just flipped it over and over and over and over. That's all we listened to for a month. I mean, we were just it was astonishing. That Bad Brains Roar cassette was astonishing. So I come back to New York. I was in a band in Boston called the Mighty COs. It didn't last long. We did a bunch of shows up there. It didn't work out. I ended up, you know, I crapped out of school. I couldn't focus on school. So I came back to New York to start. I had to get a job. You know, and for me, job always meant something in the film business. So I came back to New York. I started working in a movie equipment rental house, and it was really, I learned a lot of really valuable skills there. You know, I was loading trucks with film equipment, but I learned how to drive trucks. I learned how to fix lights. I learned about what all the equipment was. You know, I get in the van and do deliveries to sound stages and film sets. It's a fucking good job for a teenager. You know, I really, you know, I fucking drive, fucking, you know, listening to, you know, do your own thing, driving a van, making deliveries. It was great. So I came back and just still loved hardcore and loved what was going on and wanted to be a part of it. So I got together a bunch of kids that I went to high school with in the Bronx. And I was like, okay, you know, because we used to dick around back then, you know, just like make noise. I mean, in high school. And I'm like, okay, you have a bass, you're the bass player, you're the drummer, and we're doing this thing called hardcore, you know? And I wrote all the High and Mighty songs. I wrote basically on an acoustic, you know, just wrote them and showed them to the guys, and we just got the show on the road with the High and the Mighty. But the High and the Mighty was like a real A7 band. We played the A7 a lot, all the time. We were like a real A7 band. And you know, we woodshedded, you know, at A7, and you know, some of those memories of like A7 back then when it was like downtown Beirut down there, you know, and you know, and playing it like, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And the A7 had this thing that like if they liked your song, you play it again, you know. And we had this song called Road Warrior, and it was like it turned into a beloved song, you know. And one time we played it like 4 times in a row, like, you know, and people loved it. People loved that song. And so yeah, we did the High and the Mighty thing for a while. And what happened was, being in the High and Mighty and playing shows, not just A7, but you know, meeting and you know, knowing and befriending Roger Moret, who's a great guy, you know, and HR, we'd play a show out in Jersey with Agnostic Front. We'd play CB's with HR's band, and this and that. We got out there, and one of the bands I saw early on, that I always liked was Antidote.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw Antidote early on. The Thou Shalt Not Kill single just came out, and it was like my favorite band. They were great, and I became friends with Nunzio. I met him at the A7, and we became buddies, and we were hanging. And eventually, when Antidote split with their singer, I ended up joining Antidote. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But yeah, High and the Mighty, yeah.
Yeah, High and the Mighty, and I know there was a vinyl reissue a couple years back of the High and the Mighty, which is an awesome record. I've got it here. I love that record. But yeah, let's jump into Antidote, because
one thing on the High and the Mighty record.
Mm-hmm.
The one of the regrets I have, and I believe it's good to have regrets in this life. I think regrets are healthy in a certain way. People, I don't have any regrets, but I savor my regrets. One regret I have is that I never printed up that High and the Mighty demo as a single, because I think if we just by hook or by crook would have scrounged up the whatever amount of money it was to print up 500 or whatever, High and the Mighty singles in 1983, I really think things would have been different, because it's a great recording, and I think it'd be in there with a lot of this, because anybody who printed anything back then, it's like it's lauded as a classic, just by the sheer fact that you got it printed up. Just put it in that category. So I wish I would have printed that up. I think it would have certainly, I think my musical career trajectory would have been different. Not that I'm not happy the way things like panned out and worked out as I'm sitting here now, because I am. I've had a great musical and film career, but it would have been different. It took years really for me before things really there was a currency to it, so to speak.
Right. Well, Antidote was a little bit more established, of course.
Yeah, and I love the band.
And for those people who may be unfamiliar, Antidote, a couple of people who were in the band at different times, Arthur Googie from the Misfits was the drummer early on. Tommy Victor, who ended up in Prong and Danzig, was the bass player very early on in Antidote.
Very early on, yeah.
You join up after the first single's out, and Antidote was around for a while, because I remember, when I was starting to kind of get into the scene myself, this would have been like late 80s. I was still too young to go to shows, but I remember hearing about what was going on. Antidote was around. At that time, Antidote was kind of a different band in a sense. It wasn't so much hardcore. It was more kind of rock and roll, really, So what, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of that scene in the late 80s, I know we're bouncing a bit, but
it's okay. 80s, this is going to be good.
Yeah, and I'm an unabashed hard rock fan. I like the hard rock TSOL, for example.
Yeah,
maybe Jack won't hear that, but I love that.
You know what? I've revisited it lately. There's a lot of good stuff there.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So that late 80s was when I was getting involved in it. I was old enough to like buy records, go to stores and buy records and read up on things. And he had such a cool scene in New York at that time. Some of the bands I loved, top of the list, fucking Blitzspear, one of the greatest bands of all time.
Louis Gasparo on drums and Phil Caivano and Scott Lano. Yeah, they were great.
Blitzspear, Warrior Soul.
Yeah, and we played with all these bands. Antidote did in that era. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
So Prong was around, White Zombie before the major label deal. There's a band called The Thing, which kind of begat Electric Frankenstein a couple years later. So there was a lot of stuff going on. What was the vibe for you in the scene at that time? Because things had changed. And I just think that era of Antidote, bringing it back to Antidote, I love that record. I love the rock and roll Antidote.
It was interesting. Basically what happened was like I said, when I first joined the band, it was me, the guitar player, Rob Nunzio, Arthur Googie, who played on arguably the greatest Misfits stuff, Walk Among Us and Three Hits from Hell, and his brother-in-law Brian played bass. But it wasn't long after I joined that Arthur Googie and basically Brian did whatever Arthur told him to do. Basically, Arthur just didn't want to play hardcore anymore. He hated the people. He hated hardcore. He hated the people, and so we did a bunch of shows with that lineup, and musically he wanted to do something different, way different. And some of it, unfortunately, will never see the light of day because we recorded, and it's one of those things. One song was used for something, and the rest of the recording has disappeared. But it's too bad because it would have been a great snapshot as to the missing link. It's like the stuff, it's the original material that came after Thou Shalt Not Kill, of which only one song was recorded, the song Deadly Rain, which is turned up on a couple of things. So those guys left the band, Googie and Brian, and me and Nunzio were like, what do we want to do? And we decided, let's bring in two other guys. We kept the band going until I think 1986 was the last time Antidote played in that, let's say, hardcore run era. And we stopped playing. Everybody was growing their hair out. Playing
when I first met you, you had long hair.
Yeah, playing the hardcore matinees were just sort of like we were getting older, and there was young kids, and we just wanted to do other things. So we stopped playing, and also at that point, I was starting to work in the film business a little bit, and it was time to just get into something else. So we put Antidote to bed right there, the hardcore kind of version of Antidote, which was already veering away from it, so to speak. And what happened was Nunzio and the drummer, they started another band with a couple other guys, and then we started hanging out again, and they had a band called Third Rail, and I joined playing bass, and we had this band Third Rail with me playing bass and Nunzio singing, and we were getting ready to play out, and we found it really difficult booking shows and stuff. So I don't remember what the exact thought process was, other than I think it was, why don't we call it Antidote? It's like the next chapter, and at least we could get booked. And we did a couple shows with Nunzio fronting the band, and although he's an extremely talented guy, he really wasn't a guitar front man. He's like a Mick Jones kind of guy. He's like Mick Jones from The Clash, and who so we got some management who said, Drew, you should be singing, get another bass player in. So we brought another bass player in, and I was singing. And at that point, we were really sort of in a different direction. So in a weird way, the band really wasn't Antidote, but it ended up getting the Antidote moniker. We signed with Metropolis Records. We did the Return to Burn record, which has Something Must Be Done on it, has the remake of the High and Mighty song Road Warrior on it, has a couple of originals on it, but people generally were appalled. It was from Thou Shalt Not Kill to Return to Burn was just apples and oranges, and people were just kind of freaked out by it.
Well, you guys weren't the only ones. I mean, here's one record that is controversial to this day, that personally speaking,
the Warzone record.
Yeah, I love that fucking album. I love that album.
I love that album too. And we played with them in that era, and we played with Blitzbeer, and we were all doing that kind of thing. But what's interesting is, in retrospect, right? And there's no clear answer to this, right? We reformed. We got back together in '88, right? And sort of as Third Rail, but then sort of slipped back into it as Antidote. But we did a couple of the old songs live, and we went on to '92, at that point when the band collapsed, you know. But when we got back together 16 years after that, right? Was it better to have had the band out there and on people's tongues, and we had a whole different audience and had a little bit of a different continuing legacy? Or would it have been better off for us never to have, for Antidote to have stopped playing in 1986, never to play again, you know? So, you know, it seems like in a lot of ways it kept the name out there. It created a bit of a legacy. I'll bet a bit of a controversial one. And you know, we played out the hand to 1992 before the whole thing collapsed in a haze of sort of, you know, drugs and infighting.
Mm, mm. We should mention, because it's come up a couple of times in the conversation, how many years have you been sober now?
Almost 15. Yeah.
Right on, man. Right on.
Yeah, almost 15. I mean, I don't talk about it much.
Mhm.
There's no real need to, but you know, I worked hard at it in the beginning, you know, because I was one of those cats that kind of like, it was like an old joke, you know. It just, you know, it always kind of, you know, I just couldn't kick it, you know, like it just kind of dragged out, and you know, it just got to the point where, you know, enough already, like, you know, enough already. And then I went on for a couple more years, you know. So I finally knocked it off. It's been about 15 years, and it's been a really good, productive 15 years for me. I mean, you know, that's part of why I'm able to do what I do, is
Right.
because I just have this really focused work ethic. And look, man, people want to go out and people, you know, do whatever you want to do. I don't give a fuck, you know. But it wasn't working for me anymore. I ran at it hard. I did a lot of hard. I ran at it hard. I don't need to get into particulars, but I ran at it hard. I ran with some hardcore, you know, drug and alcohol people for a couple years there, and it just wasn't fun anymore. And it was also it was destructive, and I saw my life slipping away. You know, I didn't want to be that guy. You know, I didn't want to be that guy with a drug problem at, you know, 45 years old or whatever. You know, I just didn't I didn't want it, and I worked hard to clean up my act. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. You know, and I don't know if we're getting. I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but one of the things that helped me when I was getting clean and shaking the cobwebs out of my head was I got involved with doing XXX, All Ages XXX, the Boston hardcore film.
Yeah.
And it gave me a purpose and a reason and an exciting project. You know, I was directing the film, and it really helped put me on my feet, you know. So that was a big part of it. But I'm sorry if I
No. Let's stick on that for a minute, because you know that film's significant to me because that led to you and I reconnecting.
yeah.
I had met you back in the '90s through Jerry Only.
Yeah.
Back when I was working with the Misfits, you had come down to the shop and we had met. And then it went a couple of years, and we kind of reconnected a little bit on MySpace, but then there were MySpace back then.
Right
There
on.
was a little bit of a lull, and then you were doing the Boston hardcore thing, and I'm like, it'd be cool to check it out. So I went down there and, you know, met up with you, and then began meeting and having friendships with a lot of these Boston hardcore guys I know now because of being up here in New England. But I loved the Boston hardcore movie. It was such a well-documented film about that particular time, especially for someone like me who wasn't around. It was nice to get that perspective. So let's get into your music documentaries. You know, so that was kind of the first one for you.
Let me tell you something about that film. You mentioned MySpace, right? And the Boston hardcore film started out as a MySpace project. It was I think they were calling it the Boston Hardcore Oral History Project, and I wasn't involved in it early on. It was Dwayne Lucia, who was the force behind Gallery East, which is
Right.
where we used to play, and a gal named Katie, the cleaning lady, who's sort of like the mother hen of the Boston hardcore scene. And they were attempting to get this Boston oral history project going on MySpace, which was, hey, record your memories and this and that, for like, it's important stuff, we should document it, And Dwayne had a connection at what college was that on on Tremont. I forgot what Dwayne, because he's a neighborhood guy, very connected, had a connection with a local college right where he is over there, where he lives in Boston. And through that connection, they started doing on-camera interviews sort of on the news set, literally. That's why in that film, it looks like a lot of people are interviewed like on the news set. You know what I mean? It's like you see the people walking behind them. And so they started doing interviews. Why am I not remember on Tremont? What college was that? Suffolk University, right? Suffolk University, right? And they asked if I want to be interviewed for the project. So I took a bus. I took the Funghua bus up there from New York at the time, and keep in mind, this is, like I said, this is when I just was back in New York. I just was getting clean and sober. I was married, raising a kid in Vermont for a bunch of years. I split. They went down to Florida. I came back to New York. I was really like building a new life, and I would get on the Funghua bus it was like $5 or something, to Boston. And I went up there to Suffolk to be interviewed, and they interviewed me for the film. After the interview, I'm in the control room with them, and the kid is like one of the kids because it's all students. He's trying to edit together some sort of a clip or a promo. Now, I had some experience editing stuff due to my background in doing all the music videos and everything. I had some experience editing on Final Cut, right? At the time, it was Final Cut. And I'm watching this kid struggle, and I'm saying, do this, do that, try. And then Dwayne was like, why don't you let Drew just sit down? And so I sat down, and within like a half hour, boom, 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 I edited this fucking dope, fucking killer promo. And they were blown away. And we talked afterwards, and they wanted to get me involved. And I said, look, this is what we should do. We should make a documentary from 1980 to 1984, the first wave of Boston hardcore. I will be the director. Dwayne, you will be the executive producer. And Katie, you should be the producer. And then that's how that thing started rolling from there. And then I got involved because in a project like that, there was no vision. You have to have a vision. Like, what is it? And there was no real answer. Like, what is it? Like what are we doing? They didn't really know. Boston oral hit. I said, this is what we should do. This is what this should be. And you got to have vision with these things. You have to have vision and have the ability to execute. And that's just not in my projects. But when people come a lot to talk to me about film projects and reality shows and this and that. And it's amazing. Sometimes people don't really have a vision. They're like, well, I have this idea. Ideas ain't going to happen, man. You got to have some vision. You got to really, have it a fine-tuned vision and not just some vague, I think I have this idea. It's about me and my friends growing up in the neighborhood. I can't tell you how many times, I got to talk to you. I have this great idea. It's about me and my friends growing up in the neighborhood. All right, cool. But so that's a little background on the Boston hardcore film. And then, I mean, should I continue with how the dominoes fell with this?
Well, let's push the dominoes backwards a little bit. And I knew going into this conversation, as I said, it can go in 80 different directions.
Right.
But you're talking about working on this Boston hardcore thing. We should mention There was, when I first met you, actually, you were still working with Paris from the
Yeah.
Cro-Mags, Paris Mayhew, and you guys had kind of a great team going for a bit in the 90s, did a bunch of videos together, Typo Negative, Black Number One.
There's the gold record.
There you go, man. You know,
Onyx Slam. There's the double platinum. Run
yeah,
DMC. You know, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
right. So you had this whole run, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paris was the director, you were the producer for those videos, right?
For those particular videos, yes. Um, you want the background on how it all came to be?
Yeah, because I know Paris, you know, has been doing film for a while. I think he actually directed the We Gotta Know video, didn't he? So I mean, he's
Yes.
got this whole history. How did you guys hook up? And obviously, you knew each other from the whole thing, but how did you guys end up going in that direction, doing this partnership, doing these music videos back then?
Well, interestingly enough, I was with Paris last night, and
Cool.
my acoustic based sort of punk thing, the Drew Stone Hit Squad, played the Organic Grill last night, and Paris Mayhew, showed up
Right on.
in a gesture of support. So I'm really thrilled that we're friends again, because we weren't for a while, and we support each other now and enjoy each other's company. So sometimes things come back around.
Oh,
And
sure.
this is one of those things that's nice. So what happened was, basically, I connected through Paris Mayhew because I was in the High and the Mighty and he was in Cro-Mags, and we played shows together. And High and the Mighty played some show, and I can't show it on the screen. I have the flyer, but in 1984, we played a show at CBGB with HR. It was a benefit for something, and it was the last time Jesse Malin's band Hope played, and it was the first time. No, excuse me. It was the last time Jesse Malin's hardcore band Heart Attack played.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was the first Cro-Mags show ever. The High and the Mighty were on that bill. And at the show, I chased Paris around the corner and asked if we could use his guitar cabinet. It's the first time we interacted. So we ended up being in the same circles. And he knew I was working in the film business, right? Working in a movie. At the time, I was a stage manager on a film stage, which was a huge influence and thing for me too, because I was a stage manager on a film stage, and different productions would come in, big music videos, and I was there for a couple of years, and interacted with a lot of artists and a lot of people, a lot of different production companies. I saw it all. I mean, from running a film stage, in the fucking golden age of music video, and I was a stage manager at the stage, Danzig Mother, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Parents Don't Understand, Suicidal Tendencies, Send Me Your Money, all this stuff, and so on and so forth. But I met Paris. Paris was going to school and learning how to be a cameraman. He was doing cameraman work on, he connected with our old friend Paul Rackman, and he did the Anthrax video, and of course he did the Cro-Mags We Gotta Know video. He shot it and edited it himself. And one day he approached me and said, I have this band that wants to is asking me to do a video. You know about this stuff, Drew. Can you put it together? Do you want to produce it? Now, at the time, I was a stage manager at 3G Stage, and my boss said, anytime you rent this equipment, the film equipment on the stage outside the building, I'll split it with you. So I had this, I had a van, and like my brother would come to town for a little shoot or so-and-so, and I would throw some lights and stuff in, do a little gig, and split the money with my boss. So I just saved up enough money at that point to incorporate myself as Stone Films NYC, right? A little while after that, Paris comes to me and goes, I got this band. They want me to do their video. Do you think you could produce it? And this is one of those things, in life where, it was just where things lined up right, and it was right at that moment when I just had enough money to get an insurance policy for my production company. To do business in New York as a legitimate film production company, you have to have, at the time, $1 million insurance policy, right?
Mm.
So right as he asked me, I was already incorporated. I had the money. I said, yeah, let's do it. I got the insurance policy, which enabled us to rent, film cameras and get a permit to shoot and, and get onto locations. And I said, what's the band? And the answer was Biohazard.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out it was the Biohazard punishment video. And we did the Biohazard punishment video, everybody coming over the Brooklyn Bridge and all that indoor stuff where everyone's going into the lens and all that. That was done on my stage on 3G at 3Gs. The typo negative video we did soon after, where Pete Steele and the girl are coming in and out of the light, was done at 3G stage. That's where I was the stage manager. So there's a lot of tentacles here. So Paris and I do the Biohazard punishment video, and Ricky Rackman, who loved the band, who loved Biohazard. Ricky Rackman, don't believe what you heard. Ricky Rackman was a great guy, loved Biohazard, and was always good to us. When he used his personal weight and got the thing on Headbangers Ball, and Biohazard punishment screened on Headbangers Ball an unprecedented 14 weeks in a row.
Mm.
And which was unheard of at the time. And they being on Headbangers Ball, and we know this now because we've had, me, everyone. The Headbangers Ball at the time was worldwide. People in the far corners of the planet Earth saw it, and that video and that band influenced a lot of people because it was a snapshot as to what we were doing here in New York, in the New York hardcore scene. Biohazard was managed by Rush Management.
Mm-hmm.
Russell Simmons, York Hardcore was involved, and Scott Koenig.
Mm.
They had a band. Rush Management had a band on the roster called Onyx.
Right.
They had a song called Slam. Somebody had the bright idea, let's get the rock and roll white boys to do the Slam video. So me and Paris did the Slam video, and it went to #1 on MTV. And then after that, we went on an incredible run after that. Of course, we did Typo Negative Black #1 after that. We did Run DMC, Ooh, What You Gonna Do after that. We did Insane Clown Posse, Chicken Hunting, which I had a go record for, and I sold this to some crazy juggalo who just offered me a perverse amount of money for my fucking Insane Clown during the pandemic. I'm like, if you're going to give me that much cash, you can fucking have the gold record, So we just went on this incredible run, Paris and I. And I think, I forgot what the number is. I have it somewhere. I think we did 15, maybe more, like 15, videos. And some of them, and then we did Biohazard Shades of Gray and Onyx Shifty and King's X Dogman. So I think it's more than 15, but so we went on this great run together. Glorious time during the golden age of music video. And I'm just forever grateful for that. Paris Mayo was and is, he was a great talent. He really had the focus and work ethic to make these videos great. Now, I was a hustler. I was the guy who threw the party. I made it happen. I could make things happen, but I couldn't sit in an edit room and fucking edit Now later, of course, and now I've gone up, but at the time, what made us a winning combination was, his attention to detail, his incredible focus and creative vision, and me being able to execute that and make it happen. Oh, you want to do that? We should do it here with this equipment and these people. And it's going to cost the record label this amount. So yeah.
And we should mention too, Paris put out one of the best records of the year with the Aggros. Paris does his own thing. And I give him credit. He's not regurgitating something that's been done in the past. He's doing what he wants to do.
the way he wants to do it. And if you like it, great. And if you don't like it, he's okay with that too. It's not for everybody. It's hardcore instrumental music. You know, a lot of people are not grabbing it, but some people fucking love it. So
Right.
there you go.
Self-included.
There you go.
And as you know, Drew, we're not going to get to everything in this conversation.
Sorry.
No, I mean there are definitely a couple of points I really want to get to. So please forgive me. I'm going to kind of rapid fire some information for the people.
I'll try to I'll answer them as succinctly as possible.
Cool. Well, you know, Drew, you after the Boston hardcore documentary, you did the New York Hardcore Chronicles film. You did Who the Fuck Is That Guy? The fantastic Michael Alago film. Michael Alago, of course, legendary A&R guy, goes way back to the 70s scene, one of the most colorful and influential and important people in this whole thing of ours, truly. There's a film called The Jews and the Blues. I'm going to put links up when the video is posted for people to go on the Jews sites and learn more about these films. I'd love to do an episode on each film if I had the opportunity. But that said, I wanted to kind of bring things up to right now because you mentioned Biohazard. And yeah. I do know that you are working with the reunited classic lineup of Biohazard, and you're doing a documentary with those guys. What can you tell us as far as the status of that and what we can expect to see in the near future with that whole project?
I'm going to Mexico in a couple of days. They're playing a big festival outside Mexico City. They're headlining a stage on the Heaven and Hell Fest. They're headlining the stage. Under them, playing before them is Suicidal, The Casualties, and Sick of It All.
Right.
You know, the Biohazard thing, like I said, things come back around. And Biohazard was huge in my world. After doing these music videos with them, Punishment, Shades of Grey, Tales from the Hard Side, Slam with Onyx, you know, the Bionics version, and After Forever from the Nativity in Black Sabbath tribute record, I ended up road managing for them and doing a documentary for them at the time that they wrangled some money out of Warner Brothers Records for me to follow them around, buy a camera and follow them around. So I had these tapes from 1992, 93, this box of tapes, right? And I carried it everywhere through the divorce, you know, through the moving of the storage. You know, it was always like, you can go to the next chapter in your life with one carload of shit. And that box of Biohazard high 8 videotapes was always, someday I'm going to do something with this, you know? And I carried the stuff with me forever. And then a bunch of years ago, I went on eBay and I bought a high 8 camera to use as a playback deck. And I transferred everything digitally. And I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, holy shit. I mean, a lot of stuff that I didn't remember. I didn't even look at it since I shot it. I'm talking some wild, like Guns N' Roses in the studio in A&M studio, listening to the Biohazard mix, and like us with Tommy Lee and those guys, and them recording State of the World Address, like really intimate. Me interviewing the guys for God knows what, but there's a couple of interviews with me interviewing them, like as they're young, they're talking about their hopes and their dreams for the future, and it is mind-blowing stuff. And I've always loved the band. I've always loved the guys. They were separated for a long time. I used my influence to pull them back together. They got back, you know, they came on my show. You know, it was a long process to get them back together. They got back together. And part of it was, I want to do this. I want to do this documentary. And the impetus of this documentary, fellas, is you have to get back together. If I'm doing this documentary, you fucking guys have to, at the end of and they agreed to that. They agreed, we'll get back together at the end of the documentary, like in some form.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, then I'm going to start working on it. So I started working on it, and then they've been back together and they're doing stuff, and I've shot a bunch of the stuff, and the film's coming out great. It's not really officially announced because we're not sure what we're going to do with it yet. Because as you know, and as I'm sure a lot of you people that are watching know, that it's a different kind of world now. So doing a music documentary film is not what it used to be. I like what Anthrax did with their documentary. They released it in like 10-minute segments.
Yeah, it was
and
great.
I really enjoyed it, you know? So I'm not like, I'm not sure yet if this is like, should be another one of my, it's a documentary, and then what? We got to deal with distribution and we got to deal with all the bullshit. Maybe in this new world, there's a new way to get the content out there. So it hasn't been like really officially announced that director Drew Stone is doing, Biohazard. But the working title is Down for Life, the Biohazard Saga, is what we're calling it, and so it's moving along and it's great. I just cut a L'Amour segment of like, it was not to tip my hand, but incredibly, we went back to the old neighborhood, walked down the sidewalk with the guys, and have them right in front of L'Amour. It was really emotional. Like a couple of the guys broke down. It was intense, and like just talking about, how they came up and what that's like, what that club and the sidewalk, like what happened right here. It was intense, man. It's and that's why I'm going down to Mexico to actually on this laptop to show them, okay, this is what I got. What the fuck are we doing? Because my relationship with those guys, it's like it's deep, and it's like they're like my Camp Delaware buddies, like from Bunk 14. You know what I mean? They're like the kids I went to summer camp with. That's what it is. Like we get together and it's brutal. It's brutal. It's like the kids, that, when you were 14, 15, 16 years old. It's just brutal. It's, your childhood friends, and nobody has any respect for anybody else. And it's just like, it's great. In a lot of ways, it's great. In a lot of ways, it's fucking draining. But
let me get your perspective on something with Biohazard.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a statement and I'm going to kind of explain my statement.
Yeah.
Then ask you to chime in.
Mm-hmm.
I think Biohazard is the Nirvana of hardcore. Now, let me explain that. In the mid 90s, I would visit friends from high school, and this was obviously when alternative music was massive. I'd go to some houses and I'd see the cassettes, that my friends had, and it was Temple of the Dog, Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, fucking Blind Melon, and Biohazard State of the World Address would be in there.
Is that right?
Yeah, so that was the record that kind of broke through and hit suburban New Jersey kids. And these were people who didn't know dick about hardcore, but they heard the they saw the video or whatever and they got the record. So that was kind of the New York hardcore record that kind of broke through the mainstream. I think that's very fair to say. And I'm curious, and look, New York hardcore, it's not a contest, all right? But why do you think Biohazard was the band? Out of all the ones that came out, why were they the ones to get to that point where they were the band that was next to the Smashing Pumpkins and all these other records that were huge at the time?
I think part of it is you mentioned Biohazard and New York hardcore in the same breath. And I don't think Biohazard never considered themselves part of the New York hardcore scene, and they never considered themselves part of the metal scene either. They brought, and that's what we deal with in the film. In a way, they straddled both of these scenes, and you had like two hardcore kids and two metal guys that came together. They were unique. They were a very unique band in a certain regard that had the ability to to bring this to bring these two crowds together. Biohazard is not mentioned really as a New York hardcore band. So Agnostic Front, sick of it all, Biohazard. It's like, so Biohazard was always sort of danced, they were never embraced by the New York hardcore kids. They in a certain regard, but they really blazed their own path. They were a very unique band that opened a lot of doors. I can't think of many other bands that opened as many doors for as many other bands and inspired as many people as they did. Because when people saw the Punishment video and saw like these kids from the streets of New York are doing this, man, we got to get a band together, or like we got to tighten up our game. All these bands came up behind Biohazard, Madball, 25 to Life, Marauder, Sub-Zero, on and on and on and on and on. And Biohazard gave shine to these bands. And that's no secret, and Biohazard was good like that. But I think in the same regard, like you said, a lot of those people that had that cassette, it might have been a one and done or whatever. Yeah, maybe it was State of the World just was very accessible because it was Warner Brothers Records.
Right.
But I think around that time also is when Biohazard sort of zigged when I thought they should have zagged, and then they sort of, went off on but there was a pinnacle there in 1995. If you look at that Dynamo 1995 footage, it is breathtaking. It's staggering. They're playing in front of a crowd the size of Woodstock, and they're headlining it. They were headlining it. That to me is the pinnacle. And now to have them back in the original form, and they're all in really good physical shape. It's incredible. They're putting on great shows now. But they're a much lauded band. And I'm just so happy for them. I love those guys so much. They really they're my old camp buddies.
Right on. And I'm a believer that it's important to remember and mention, people who've left, because sometimes that gets lost in the mix. I want to mention Anthony, the original Biohazard drummer, who
Anthony Mio, he passed away.
Back,
Yep.
who played on the demo and original member. So rest in peace to him, certainly.
And Scott Koenig.
Right. Yeah.
Scott Koenig, who managed Biohazard in those days, was a huge part of it. I mean, Scott was very, very big in their initial success. It was huge. So yeah.
Yeah, we all just follow the lead of the giants who come before, so respect to those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, just ask the Bad Brains, right? I mean, not to veer off, but a lot of bands, Bad Brains, kicked the door in for a lot of bands.
Definitely.
That followed,
Speaking of bands, I want to get back to yours because you currently front a band called Incendiary Device. It's got some familiar faces from the Antidote days, and you are about to release a motherfucker of an album on Bridge 9 Records, the great Bridge 9 Records. So bring us up to speed, man. What's going on with Incendiary Device? What do you have going on?
It's the best thing I think I've ever done. And I know people say that, but I'm in a band now where like I love the guys. And it's not like, we enjoy spending time together. And the material was written with me in mind. Like Tristan DeGraves wrote a lot of the stuff, and he knows what my strong points are. So, musically, they come, him mostly came in with a lot of stuff that's geared towards sort of my delivery and what I'm good at, and it hasn't always been the case. Like we talk about, Antidote, Return to Burn, and this and that. This is the stuff that I do good. You know, I do that early American hardcore shit. You know, Negative Approach, Minor Threat, early Black Flag, Bad Brains, like SSD Control. I got that's my lane. You know, I love that stuff, and so a lot of it harkens back to that. But it's got some great melodies. It's got a lot of hooks. The guys, the band is really sort of the extended. It's just the how do you say it? The family tree of Antidote. Antidote. Then we rebranded ourselves Antidote NYHC, and then we went on and said, you know what? We're Incendiary Device, and it was a great. I wish we would have done it sooner, but once we planted the flag, we're Incendiary Device. Things started happening for us. You know, the music, you know, speaks for itself. Bridge 9 signed us. We went into the studio with a couple of heavy hitters. Neil Zum Osberg, who used to be an Antidote, who of course, you know, created the Sansamp bass driver and Fryette amplification, is just like a you know, a studio, a sound, a tech. How do you call it? He's like a tech pervert. You know what I mean? He just knows sounds and guitar sounds, and then, you know, through his connection in that world, we had Dan Kornoff mix the record. And Dan Kornoff, you know, My Chemical Romance, Papa Roach, so El Nino, and so on and so on and so forth. Huge bands, and you know, Zum got him to mix the record. You know, in some regard, you know, we made it as easy as possible, and you know, struck it. You know, Zum made it happen, and when we heard the first mix, we were like, we had to dial it back a little bit, because, you know, we're not like the European festival band, you know. Right. It was like, you know, it's like, whoa, dial it back a little bit, you know. You know, we're a fucking 4-piece, you know, New York hardcore band, you know, because he does big bands, and like you listen to those bands, and it's just like, oh, you listen to a Papa Roach or My Chemical Romance or some of the other stuff he's done. It's a big sound,
right?
You know?
Yeah,
you know, so we had to sort of hip him to who we are, you know, and what our, you know, what our mission statement is, you know. But it worked out great. Dan was fantastic. You know, it's our record release show is here in New York on November 12th, a free all ages show at Jesse Mallon's place, the Bowery Electric. Everybody's welcome. And the music video is out for Incendiary Device. My kid did it, Caleb River, who just graduated from SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and so put some of those skills to use that cost us so much money to put him through fucking school.
Right. And you got a great band right now. I mean, you know, Sean,
I do, man.
Great guitar player. Tristan, I love to death. You know, he's a human being, great bass player.
And Mike is just the sweetest guy. You know, no, and I know people say shit like this, but it's true. I've been in a lot of bands. You know, I fucking love this band I'm in. I love the guys, and you know, and I'm sure you can relate to this, because you've been in music for a long time. When we walk into the rehearsal room, it's all about Incendiary Device. Nobody's carrying in, my wife, my kid, my drug problem, as soon as these guys walk in, this is what we do. And it wasn't always like that for me in bands. It was always drama and this and that. I'm sorry I'm late, because these guys, we just love each other's company. And as soon as everyone comes through the door, it's like, this is what we're about. And everybody like focuses up, and it's great. And I really enjoy it. And things, everybody listens to everybody else. Listening's a big part of it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You know, everybody listens to everybody else. Everybody's respectful of everybody else's wants and needs. And you know, hey, how can we make this better? Okay, let's do that. Okay, you know, and everybody said, how can I how can I make my part of it better? Hey, how about this? Okay, what can I, and there's a lot of that kind of communication, and it's great, man. I really love it. I don't think we're the kind of band, we're not going out and touring. I don't think we're gonna tour. I just have too much stuff going on between the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live, the 2 films I'm doing, the book I'm doing, this, that, and the other thing. I'm not trying to get in a van, a vehicle, and spend 30 days.
Right.
I don't, but we pick and choose our stealth missions. Sure, we'll play with Biohazard at Irving Plaza. We'll play with Go Go Bordello at Brooklyn Bowl. We'll get over to Europe. We'll do weekends here. We'll do 10 days here and stuff like that. So, but we're not a band that's gonna, and also, I think the world that we live in now, honestly, is like, it's a different world. A band of guys my age are not going to break to the next level by getting in a van and touring. I don't think so. Because by sort of grinding it out the way that we used to, where you and your buddies in your 20s would get in a van and just grind it out.
Right.
We can't grind it out. I'm not grinding it out. And I've also learned that it's a fine line. You got to be careful, because if you make the wrong call, it might hurt the morale. And if you hurt the morale, then everything could crumble. So you got to, at this stage of the game, pick and choose wisely what you do. Hey, let's go play some dive bar in Cleveland and sit in the van together 2 days going. Not a good idea at this point. It's like, you don't want to, you don't want dissension. You want to keep, you want to make the right choices, and in a way, less is more. And I say, like, we play New York. We play the Bowery Electric because I'm involved with the place. We fill the place. It's our home. If you want to see Incendiary Device, New York City is a cosmopolitan city. Come to fucking New York City. We have a joke though. We don't play outside of the New York City transit system. Other than that, it gets difficult. But that's not true. I'm being silly. You just saw we just played in your neck of the woods,
Yeah, up at Bridge 9.
Yeah.
And we should mention too, I mean, I think it's great that the record's coming out on Bridge 9. I think Chris Wren has done amazing things with the whole Bridge 9 brand, whether it be the label, that store in Beverly, the fact he's got shows in the back of the store. It's such a great scene. To me, it reminds me of what it was like in the 90s, man, when you would go to a record store and it would be the hub of activity, and a lot of great people involved. Our buddy, the great Larry Kelly. There's a whole great scene up there. So more power to Chris and Bridge 9 for sure.
Yeah, Larry Kelly's a big part of what we do. Larry Kelly, Ray Hogan, Tony Palmisano. These are guys like that, like really handle a lot of the Incendiary Device stuff and enable us to do what we do. Larry Kelly's a guy I used to run with back in the day in Boston. We did, we cut a wide swath of damage in the 80s. We both survived to tell the tale. Larry Kelly is a great guy, incredibly loyal friend and a great person. I'm very fortunate to have him in my life. He believes in what I do. He's supportive of what I do.
Same here.
Yeah, and he's involved with Bridge 9, and is sort of like in a way, I got to say, like, he's sort of like our unofficial A&R person at Bridge 9 Records. Like, I don't have to fucking deal with the label. All I got to do is call Larry Kelly.
Right.
And be like, hey, what the fuck's going on? And he'll fucking deal with it. And it's really, like I said, the morale, it really just helps. We're in a good place with this band. You know what I mean? It's like, thank God. Finally, Finally.
Well, I'm going to do my best to see your record release show. I have a little bit of a dilemma in that something's come up. I've got a thing kind of in the works with a certain band. I can't reveal who it is, but the initials are Tool. So I got this whole thing with those guys. So I'm not. So if I miss it, I'm there in spirit. I something came up, but I'm gonna do my best.
I know you are, Joel, and you've been incredibly supportive and a great friend. And I love doing this kind of stuff with you. I love when you come on the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. And listen, I know sometimes some real life shit, but this is one of the shows. Now that's legit, but this is one of the shows where I'm calling people and I'm like, yo, check this out. I don't give a fuck about your wife. I don't give a fuck about your job, and I don't give a fuck about your fucking booger eating kid. Just be at this fuck. This doesn't happen every day. Be at this fucking show.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna try. The ink's dried.
Listen, no, but I get it. Tool is. I understand. This isn't like my kid. My fucking wife, my kid, I got soccer practice. It's a little different.
Yeah. Well, listen, we got a few minutes here. I want to get into the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. I co-host. I've been very fortunate. You've been
I love when you're on.
Bring me on.
Yeah.
And you're about, roughly 300 episodes in. You got your 300th episode with Ray Capo coming up in December. I know you started this during the pandemic. From my perspective, I give you credit because I've been on the show as a guest and as a co-host. It's kind of a multitasking nightmare you've got going on because you've got the video, the images, the live feed, the this and the that, and you've got guests and you've got people like me. Steve Messina, the great photographer, has a segment. Our dear friend Lori Dawn comes on with Women of the Pit. You've got so many things going on. So I give you credit for keeping the ball in the air with that. But because you have this whole background doing film and video and stuff. When you entered the world of podcasting, let's say, and you started this show, how would you say your past work really helped inform you to where you can produce the kind of show you're doing, which is so unique because there's so many moving parts to the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live?
I think a big part of it was seeing my dad work with actors on the film set. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot as a child watching my dad, and when he was directing, my dad directed a lot of sports guys. He did commercials with Yogi Berra, Terry Bradshaw, Willie Stargell, Mario Andretti, Meadowlark Lemon, and then seeing him work with regular actors, just seeing how my dad interacted with actors and how he got them to play to the lens. On my show when I do a lot of this stuff and that stuff, that's straight from what my dad, from like having, because my dad did a lot of humor dialogue stuff. So a lot of this stuff and like into the lens stuff that's from my dad. And I mentioned before, I think my life or my career is interesting in so much that I was in the Mighty COs, and then I was in the High and the Mighty, and then I was in Antidote, and I did the music videos, and I tour managed, and I did all the extreme sports films. For a long time, they felt like very separate islands, but it was all like, what am I doing with my life? I've gone from this to this to this. But there came a certain point, I'd say, I don't know, close to 20 years ago, where all that stuff accumulatively really had a currency to it. You know what I mean? I became a sum of all the parts. And that's when I arrived, and it was a great place to be. I'm the journeyman. I've done all this stuff. Whereas before it was going from one thing to another, and then all of a sudden I gathered it all up, and it was, wow, he fucking did music video, So that was a great moment for me, and I think that kind of happened after the Boston Hardcore film, when the Lago film and came out. But I think the humans get acclimated to anything, right? And like I operate at a high level of chaos, and doing the show is really chaotic. Now it's routine to me. It's just like people that were, operating the firing squad. After a while, yeah, I did it, whatever, and at this point, nothing gets me too flustered. If a guest doesn't make it on, I don't get really upset. We'll reschedule them. If there's a technical thing, I'll just talk to the audience and have a. What's happened was a couple shows that were heading for disaster ended up being like the greatest shows when I just said, "Hey, we're fucked. The guest isn't going to make it. He's on a plane. Here's the link. Here's the link. Anybody wants to come on, come on. Let's fucking, what's up?" And like, those are my favorite shows, because I can listen, I love musicians, but like, I enjoy talking to like the guy that picked up the garbage this morning outside my building,
Right.
and like the guy, like, I want those guys on my show. Like I enjoy in a certain way talking to the everyday man more so than I do for the Metallica guys. That shit's been done to death. I'm
Mhm.
sick of talking to the Metallica guys. I mean, what I mean. I
Right.
mean, it's like, so I think part of the reason of the success of the show is it's very accessible, to everybody, and everybody's welcome. And I try to live my life like that. Everybody is welcome in my world. I don't, I'm not hung up on this, that, the other thing. And I think another reason for the success of the show is I'm not interested in politics, and I'm not interested in who's been vaccinated, and I'm not interested in the presidents. On my show, we talk about the tie that binds us all together: music.
Exactly. Going
It's the
back to the
music.
original point about Boston and, building a scene. Exactly.
And the community and the culture and music. You want to talk about Trump? Don't do it on my show. You want
Right.
to talk about Hamas and Israel and who's been vaxxed? Don't do it on my show. That's not my show.
Right.
I don't. That's not why I'm here. And people have accused me of like, because I have this platform and this bandwidth. You really should. People like you need to take a stand. I've been criticized for not taking a stand, and like, that's not what my show was created for. If I want to do a politics show, I'll start another show. But
Right.
that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I want to talk about. This is just me talking. That's not what I want to talk about. I don't really want to hear you talk about it either. Like, I don't give a fuck who you voted for, and I don't give a fuck, whether you're vaxxed or not. It just doesn't concern me in my life.
Right.
I'm that's just not on my radar screen. It doesn't mean that much to me.
Me
But
too. Me too.
some
I
people,
already moved myself from that world
yeah,
years ago. I could give a shit.
and that's why a lot of people love coming on my show and a part of my show. The Brian Bakers of the world, the Mobies of the world.
Right.
They hear, Drew's show is right on, and you're not going to get ambushed on some bullshit. You're not going to get ambushed and asked some inappropriate questions. Smart, coherent, music-loving people watch the show, and it's an interactive show. And I think that's all been part of it. And I'm really grateful. My patrons, I have a Patreon page that support me. They enable me to do it. I mean, let's be frank. My show pays my rent and bills. And it's it enables me to spend and the amount of time and homework it takes to do the kind of work that we do. This isn't like I got another job and I come home for an hour. I spend sometimes days researching, writing out questions, listening to music, talking to people that are close to that guest, watching other podcasts, reading other interviews. Very rare that I do a show and it's just like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to wing this one. I never wing anything. There's always something sketched out. But some are a little bit easier than others. I mean, sometimes I have a guy that I just know the guy and I just can write out some questions and okay, this is going to be cool, you know. But sometimes I have guests on that I don't know at all, and I don't know their music.
I'm going to nail you to the wall now, Drew. Here it comes. I'll tell you, I haven't seen all the episodes, but I've seen a fair amount of them. I'd say I've seen at least a third of what you've produced, at least.
Yep.
My two favorite guests you've had on, Phil from Blitzspear and Monster Magnet. I love that episode. He just seems like such a pure, true guy, and it was such a pleasure to watch that interaction. And number two is Louie from Carnivore, who's, you know, a huge influence on me, and such a sweetheart of a guy too.
It was a good show.
Who are your top two?
It's really hard to say, but you know what's coming to mind? A couple of shows that really one, a show that really made me emotional was Michael Graves.
Yeah.
And Michael Graves fucked me up. He fucked me up. He like, a couple people got me crying on the show, and Michael Graves is one of them. And I know Michael Graves is a controversial guy, you know, because of his, you know, political beliefs or whatever, but he came on my show and we talked about music and we talked about the good times that we shared together. And I think he's an incredibly talented person, and I love his voice. And we shared some great times, and I know you have also with those guys.
Yeah,
that's showing. Another one was Mike Judge. Mike Judge came on my show, and it was really emotional. You know, that it was really emotional. And you know, there's been a couple. Evan Seinfeld from Biohazard fucked me up. You know, because you know I have a long history with those guys and him. I mean, he was a pallbearer at my brother's wife's funeral, you know, and Evan Seinfeld and I have, you know, gone through some shit together. And that one, but a lot of some of the great shows are the ones that just flow really nicely, you know, that just, you're not like what we're doing here. Like, oh, are we recording? Oh, we are. Like you know what I'm saying? Like
right.
This is like, oh shit, we're recording. You and I, we're just talking here, man. You know, and there's been some great guests that have come on, and it's just been this great back and forth. Really, the show was difficult in the beginning because a lot of people didn't have a handle on this whole sort of internet video chat thing. It was amazing. I'd have guys on the show that have sold millions of records and yet can't follow a link to get into a fucking video chat, you know? You know, but now it seems everything's is up to speed. You know, but I was a little bit ahead of the curve with the show. I started a show when like half the people didn't understand the technology or, you know, how to do it. So yeah, there's been a lot. And you know what I like too? I love doing the shows with sort of with the guests that are really thrilled and honored and appreciative to be on the show, and it's given them some shine and some much deserved, you know, spotlight. And I enjoy doing that. I've had my glory. I've done my thing, man. I've had it. I have my glory. Yeah, I haven't been in, you know, I haven't been in the biggest bands in the world, but I know what it's like to get on stage and play in front of like a lot of people. And I haven't done the biggest films, but you know what? I know what it's like to have a film play in a packed theater. You know, I've had a lot of fun and a lot of glory. It really brings me joy to bring other people to give other people shine and give other people exposure through the bandwidth that I've created. That's what I love about my show, is when we bring somebody on that's just really thrilled to be on. Like, you know, we just had Tony Six from Winterwolf on the show, and he was flabbergasted that I would ask him. And he came on and he was a great guest, and he deserved to be on the show. And that's kind of balance that I like to have the show. And I think people, it happens, you see in the chat room, people like tuning into the show to people that they have no idea who they are. because we always connect in. There's always there's an undercurrent and an underlying theme of, yo, believe it or not, this dude here is, like the last show I did with my brother. It was like a Halloween ghost hunters thing. But we had Craig Satari from Sick of It All on the show because he is an avid paranormal guy and he's very knowledgeable. So there's always that sort of connection there that pulls him in. So, I'm fortunate in that regard.
Right on. Drew, we've got to end this at some point. So why don't you tell us where people can go to find out everything that you got?
Yeah. Well, if you want to watch the New York Hardcore Chronicles live, it's on my YouTube channel, Stone Films NYC on YouTube. It's also streams live on the New York Hardcore Chronicles page on Facebook, and on my personal page on Facebook, the live stream, and then it archives on YouTube. There's 300 shows I've done on YouTube, plus all my other stuff. I am in production right now with 2 films. One of them is Down for Life, the Biohazard Saga, and I'm working on my dramatic feature film. It's a Brooklyn heist film called Finders Keepers, and we shot the trailer for it. We were just shooting it this summer. That is moving ahead. The new book is out, the New York Hardcore Chronicles Volume 2, 1990 to 1999, as well as the first edition of it, which is the New York Hardcore Chronicles Volume 1, 1980 to 1989. It's available at www.stonefilmsnyc.com. There's only about 30 of Volume 1 left. So there's that. Incendiary Device has a debut album coming out November 10th on Bridge 9 Records. Go to the Bridge 9 site and get it. There's a couple of vinyl variations. I think there's a CD. There's some merch available. We're doing our record release show on November 12th at the Bowery Electric. And I'm working on the Greg Smith London 1977 book, which you contributed to.
Yes.
That's at the designers now.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's just this incredible archive that was gifted to me by a family friend that was a cameraman for my dad, and then was a cameraman when we did all these videos. Greg Smith gave me 3,500 negatives that he shot in 1977 London with staggering amount of beautiful photos. And so that's getting designed, and I think that's and then the other films, watch my films are on Amazon Prime. XXX All Ages, XXX All Ages, XXX the Boston Hardcore Film. Who the fuck is that guy? The Fabulous Journey of Michael Alago. The New York Hardcore Chronicles film. The New York Hardcore Chronicles film 1.5 are on Amazon Prime. You can find them there. My other film, The Jews and the Blues, is doing the film festival circuit right now. I've been doing all kinds of screenings, although it's a crazy world right now, and I'm a little worried about doing the next screening, in the kind of the environment of the world right now. Sadly, it's about my musical journey in the Middle East that really turns into a bit of a spiritual journey. Really interesting film. I love the film. I did it with my brother, and my dad was involved. So yeah, that's some of what I'm doing.
Just a little bit, not much happening.
And the Drew Stone Hit Squad just played last night. So
there you go, man.
And I have a girlfriend, and I have a dad that's in assisted living, and I'm taking care of him. And there you go.
Wonderful. Well, listen, you've done a lot of work over the years chronicling so many efforts and creative achievements by people and scenes, and as time moves on, and especially as people leave this life, the work you're doing is incredibly important. Being a chronicler of
as is yours.
Thank you. As is what's come before. You're doing great work, and a lot of people appreciate that. Personally, I appreciate our friendship, which is going on almost 30 years now. So I appreciate you being on and give me some of your time.
Sure.
And we're going to see each other again soon on your show.
Yeah, that's
A
right.
little bit.
That's right. And listen, Joel, I consider you a peer, and you've done a lot of great work, man. Your books, you put a lot of time and love into them, and I thank you. We are musical archaeologists, so let's continue on our quest.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, could you conclude this conversation with your farewell that you close out your show with? I think that'd be kind of cool.
Absolutely. I do believe this, not to be corny, but and sometimes bad things happen to good people, but I think in general, my parting words to really, and words I live by, are do good things and good things will come to you.
Right on.
Take care, everybody.